Welcome to 2025, ladies and gentlemen, as the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show is off and running here on the Better Sports Network. We'll be here for the next 2 hours. Hi, hello, and how are you? Welcome in. I am Eric Balkman, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and of course the FFPC. Well, and welcome in the Fantasy Hall of Famer from the FSWA, from Footballguys, from SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio. He is the football diehard on X at Football Diehard. Bob Harris, welcome back to the show, man.
Eric, thank you so much for asking me. I'm glad we were able to work out a suitable time, and I love doing this show with you. You are, sir, a phenom in this craft, a remarkable host. And I know this because I work with one of the best in the industry every darn night on Sirius, so I have a reference point that is solid.
You know what's great about that, and I don't know if I told you this. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't, but the thing that you and Mike Dempsey did for Footballguys every day essentially during the season, that little 10-minute podcast to get you caught up on, for a guy like me I'm busy with a lot of stuff, and every day I listened to that and I knew exactly where my holes were, where I needed to okay, I need to research this more. Because you guys hit on everything, and it was 10 minutes. It was awesome. So as much as as great as it was, I hate to see it go. But I understand it'll be back next season, week 18. What's week 18 like for you?
It's kind of miserable because you're still there are people still playing, and you want to service that portion of your audience. There are obviously people playing, DFS and getting ready for contests. So most of the contests start, after this week. But yeah, there's a lot going on, and you have to shuffle through it's just like the old week 17, except it's 18. And I think it feels like it's a little more clear cut than usual. Like people are coming a little cleaner. Like we know a lot of the people who are resting. We know a lot of the people who have something to play for who won't be necessarily resting. So that makes it a little easier, but it's still a hot mess.
Right. And I think so. And the other thing, I'll bring this up to you as well. And I don't know if you caught this, but I was listening to Sigmund Bloom and Cecil Lammy's latest podcast. And I shouldn't say the latest one. I think it was the latest one, but it was the week 17 wrap up. And I'm listening to this, and Cecil was making, I don't want to say like a claim or a call to action, but he was not happy with the level of week 17 play. And I know most people take week 18 off for their season long stuff. Do you think we'd ever see week 17 become the norm, where we're going to have 2 weeks where we don't have fantasy championships or whatever? We're going to see. And I guess Sig brought this up too. If we want to reward them in week 16, we got to get rid of these week 14 buys.
This is Sigmund's mission this year, and he is going to shake the halls of the hallowed halls of the 3-letter shield its own self as need be to try and make that happen. And I mean, and I think his point is valid. I don't know that it's going to be successful, but I'm here to help him because I always help Sigmund Bloom. Right. I'll wear a bucket hat if I have to. And so the idea is to have all the buys done before week 14 so that we can play our playoffs weeks 14, 15, and 16, be done with the season. Christmas time arrives. People want to do their holiday things with their families and whatnot. And here is everybody trying to scramble to set lineups, and people maybe miss things because there's a Wednesday and a Friday and a Saturday and a Sunday game. And it's getting very complex. And so I'm on board with Sigmund on this one. I question our ability to make enough racket to make it happen. But, every time I doubt Bloom, I end up feeling pretty stupid. So there you have that.
Yeah, and if we get the 19 game schedule, or not 19 game, the 19 week schedule, maybe double buys, that could make this happen even easier too. Or we get the buys done with, we get rid of the last. We'll see what happens. Tom Smith hanging out with us tonight. Cullen Hoffman, former $260,000 high stakes winner in the FFPC last year. Cullen, check your email. I sent you an email. I need you to respond to that at your leisure. How about this? I know we got college football going on right away, but a question right out of the gate from Tom Smith. Do you guys think Jeremiah Smith could be the first wide receiver drafted in the NFL draft? No, I do not, because of the rules. He's got to be in college for 2 more years.
Right.
Do I think he would be the first wide receiver taken in this year's NFL draft? I think there's a darn good possibility. Bob, I don't know if you caught that game last night, but he looks awesome.
I did. The dirty confession here, I do not pay any attention to college football all year long. People talk about it. They might as well be speaking a foreign language. I did happen, however, to watch yesterday's games, both of which were off the hook. Insane to that Ohio State, man. Just like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I do think it's interesting. I know on the rookies, I'm like this time of year, I'm going to be behind the curve. I put a lot of effort into it when we hit, the end of the Super Bowl. Obviously, I'm playing catch up, but also I've long been a proponent. Like, I'm not out there studying film. I'm not following the college week to week. I don't know these people's histories or their skills or what they're doing. These are things I have to learn on the fly. I think it's better when I have time to sit down and do it. That is not during the regular NFL season that I'm going to have time to do it. But I also lean on people who are really good at this and really smart. My friend Matt Waldman, my colleague at Footballguys, the author of the Scouting Portfolio, who I do a weekly podcast with. So some of it just rubs off on my osmosis on me. But I do have to do a heck of a lot of studying on these players. And I'm going to say, I'm gonna go ahead. I don't have my track shoes on, but I'm gonna run a little victory lap here. I think my rookie prognosticating fantasy wise, I've been dead on point. If you go back to the last two expos where I sit on the first panel every year, we have the big, they call it the Mount Rushmore panel, whatever. I don't call it that, but that's what they call it. And we sit there and they ask you to plant a flag. And 2 years ago, my flag was, if everyone's drafting Bijan Robinson in the first round, based on draft capital expended on him, on anticipated role, on all the things that they were, his talent and ability, why was I not drafting Jahmyr Gibbs in round 4 instead of him in round 1? I made the same argument at this year's Expo with Malik Neighbors over Marvin Harrison. And I think, it turns out these guys are all very good, but the situations and the things we pay attention to as fantasy managers maybe aren't necessarily the things we need to pay attention to. Like, don't pay the premium. Take the discount. This is the story of my fantasy life, is looking for, I'm old and mean and cheap. I want my discounts. And I think it can work out for you. And it's not to say that Marvin Harrison Jr. couldn't have been a hit. It's not to say that Bijan Robinson was a super dud. It's just what I paid for him. The opportunity cost is more than, I could have landed better players in that spot and still get a great player in round 4, whether 2 years ago it was Gibbs or last year it was Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's words to live by. Now we have to wait, at least for a few weeks, until we get drafts going again for 2025 to actually apply that. But it is good. It is good that we're getting this out here tonight. We got plenty more to get to tonight. Bob and I are going to go around the NFL. We're going to talk about his biggest lesson learned this past year. We're going to talk about his big pros versus Joe's championship in the FFPC. And then we'll get into some other stuff, including but not limited to Brock Bowers, Marvin Mims, and Baker Mayfield. The playoff challenge early preview will be our second segment tonight. The players that we know are in, or the teams that we already know that are in, we're going to talk about those players, or some of them, from a postseason standpoint. And then Bob and I will throw together an FFPC Weekly challenge lineup for Week 18, which is going to be fun because we just don't know what to expect. Could be maddening, but I think sometimes in that madness comes a lot of hilarity that you'll be able to enjoy live on the show tonight. By the way, you can register now for the world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge. Win $500,000 or $100,000. Enter for as little as $35. Same thing with the weekly challenge. Enter for as little as $35. Win up to $2,500 in the Week 18 FFPC Weekly Challenge. Just go to myffpc.com to register for that. So, Bob, I know on Sirius you have been talking a lot with Mike Dempsey about the lessons you have taken away
Correct.
from in 2024, the things that you have learned, the things that we always look at the end of the season. We're like, this is what I need to do better in 2025, whether we do that or not. And sort of like, the people that say, well, I'm going to work out really hard on January 1st and come January 10th, you're back to slamming beer and eating wings. So whether we apply these lessons we have learned in 2025, that's up to us. It remains to be seen if it'll happen. However, the thing at the forefront of your mind, the thing that you learned this year that you want to carry over to next year to help you become a fantasy player is fill in the blank.
So let me start out by saying the resolution I put out on SiriusXM's Twitter feed, X feed, however you like to say that, was I actually need to heed the lessons I've learned many, many times over, and then I totally ignore every year when I draft, right? I'm actually going to pay attention to the lessons I learned this year. The biggest takeaway for me this year was diversify, not to focus on single players. There would come a point, and you're doing the same thing I am. We jump into the best ball rooms in February. We start drafting. There are players we really like that are available at certain points. I'm going to resist taking the same players so much. I'm going to diversify more. I think that's the thing that I need to do. Like this, and like in past years, it's cost us all. And we realized it a couple of years back. It was Jonathan Taylor going as the number 1 overall, had a disappointing season. I think this year, probably Christian McCaffrey would fall under that same. Like if I had the 101 overall, I was pretty much taking McCaffrey, right? Like, and like, there comes a point where you start feeling overweight on players. And so you start diversifying just because you're forced to. This year, I'm not going to be forced to. I'm going to volunteer. I'm going to do the Mike Tomlin. I don't want hostages. I want volunteers. I'm going to voluntarily be diversifying. I'm not going to be held hostage by Christian McCaffrey or Jamar Chase or whoever it might be going with that 101 overall this year, but also down through the drafts. I'm going to be doing the same thing. There were like what I would call for me auto picks, Eric. If I got to a certain point in a draft and the player's there, I'm just taking them. I just, and so that level of focus on single players, and Dempsey talked a little bit about it on our program the other day, is like, work within the tier. Take players within that group and don't focus on one player in that group, because turns out, surprise, who would have known, we don't accurately predict the future with 100% certainty every time. And so all the things we do, and we talked about this last time I was on this program, you tell yourself a happy story to draft a player. Man, I can tell myself the best of stories that I believe them 100%. I need to believe them like 70%.
What's funny is I used to think diversification was good and healthy and the correct thing to do early and even to the early to middle part of the draft. But at the end, I just kind of threw it out the window, because then I would just be like, I love this sleeper. I love Kendra Miller or Dameon Pierce or whatever. I'm just going to load up on those guys. And I used to think that was okay. I'm kind of going against that now. I think I want to diversify from round 1 all the way through round 20, because there are going to be those sleepers, and maybe not sleepers, just like injury away type guys that I didn't necessarily like, but because I was so focused on one guy in round 16, I never hit on this guy. And so I think that's something I need to do next year. Let me throw this at you, because you brought up McCaffrey, and maybe not for the exact same reason as me, but I had the 101 in 3 drafts this year. All 3 drafts, I ended up taking McCaffrey. And I kind of poo-pooed the injury thing, going on with him. I didn't think it was as serious as a lot of people. I was talking with a high-stakes player in Las Vegas before his main event draft. And he asked me, he's like, we have the 101. What would you do? And I said, I'm not concerned with McCaffrey. That's who I would take. And then he's like, well, what if we were? Who else would you let? And we talked about Lamb and Hill and all these other. And thankfully, I talked with him in the middle of the season. He did not listen to me. They did take somebody else other than McCaffrey. But here's the thing. I remember a few years ago, and I can't remember who exactly it was. It could have been Maurice Jones-Drew or some like Ray Rice. I don't know. It was like some first-round pick that was running back that was coming into the season a little beat up. And I was like, I don't want to mess around with that. I know my guys are going to get hurt as the season progresses. Why would I add a player who's already dealing with something onto my drafted team? Now, I took that and ran with it, and I missed out on this guy again, I can't remember who it was, but I said never again. So then this year, McCaffrey dealing with something. I know what a lightning rod he could be for fantasy football. I took him in all 3 spots. I said, this leg, this calf, be darned. I don't care about it. It's going to be fine. Spoiler alert, it was not fine. In fact, it was the opposite of fine. It was awful. And now I'm going back the other way, where I'm like, now I'm going back to my original take of I'm not dealing with any guys dealing with pre-draft injuries. Maybe in the first round, Bob. I looked at it from the standpoint of like, okay, well, maybe I could have taken. There were a significant amount of first round busts, but when you're dealing with a player of, and I want to say, let's just say first round pick, not McCaffrey's caliber, but a first round pick, and he is dealing with something, and we're following the information that is being released to us by the beat writers, by the team. It all seems kosher. How do we read between the lines? How do we avoid a McCaffrey situation like that? Because it's a delicate balance trying to figure out, if this guy is going to be right for me or if he's not.
The clues were there for us on McCaffrey if we would have paid attention, but we didn't want to because we wanted that player and a half upside. And that's what Christian McCaffrey is. He is a player and a half at his position. He gives you leverage over the field, whether you're playing big tournaments, head to head, season long, dynasty, whatever format you're playing in, a player, especially at running back, who gives you player and a half output almost every week is something that's hard to resist. The warning signs were there. And I'm going to say this. So like, if you listen to the show yesterday, we did our resolutions, and a couple of my resolutions were be more skeptical about coaches, what coaches say, and be more skeptical about the media, right? Like, they're doing their job and they're telling us things. I don't know if everybody is reporting as much as they did maybe a few years ago. And I want to highlight somebody who is he's a pot stirrer, right? Grant Cohn from SI.com. He's looking to make trouble. In this case, he was right. Like, he's been talking about this all year about McCaffrey, and it made perfect sense. There was a guy who was hurt late last season who didn't play in the last game and then sat out the game that they didn't have to play, came back, missed the bye. They had a bye week, came back for the playoff game, didn't perform well, then couldn't work out all summer. Then they extended him and it gave us optimism, but then he couldn't practice throughout training camp, and then he was good to go week 1. And I will say this, Eric, I talked to people in this building, the 49ers building, who would know. And they were who I've known for a very long time, and they were either directly lying to me or they didn't actually know. I talked to people who talked to McCaffrey directly, and they felt 100% certain that he was going to go. We all felt 100% certain he was going to go. I can remember writing about it the Friday before that week 1 Monday night game. He was there telling us he was going to get his full workload. We should have been more skeptical. And I mean, like with coaches, we can even go just to recent examples. The last couple of weeks, from Mike Tomlin telling us George Pickens was going to start, telling the whole world on CBS Sports and the pregame show that George Pickens was good to go, or he was going to be active at least. And then this past week, we saw Jared Mayo pull the okie doke on who is starting running back. He told everybody it was going to be Antonio Gibson. And yet there was Ramondre Stevenson. Not that it worked out. I mean, if you started for whatever reason Gibson over Stevenson, you weren't angry, but it was an out and out lie, right? And so, and like, I get it. There is competitive advantage and all those things, and we give these people a little bit of leeway for that. But there comes a point where, you know, the old Who song, don't get fooled again, man. We won't. And I don't want to get fooled again. So I'm just going to be more skeptical in general of what I hear. Here's something I do, Eric, when I watch just the news, right? Just all these people are trying to tell me something, right? Everyone wants me to believe something on the news now. Nobody wants to inform me. They want to convince me of something. And when they're doing that, I ask myself a question with every single sentence that's spoken to me. Does that even make sense? That's what I'm going to do with football. Does that make sense? Stop and think about it for a minute. Don't just accept it. Don't eat what they're feeding me, but sit down and be critically thinking about it. And I mean, honestly, should be doing that all along, but you get complacent. There's so much coming at you, and we have so many decisions to make every week that you're relying on people to feed you great information. Well, they're feeding you the information that's available, but it may not be the great information. So go back and think about guys like, even guys, we were talking about this yesterday as well, guys who have the contract issues. Look, CeeDee Lamb was going to have a good season, but it was a slow start. Jamar Chase had a great season, but it was a slow start. Take those things into account when you're drafting players. Maybe it doesn't work out, said Brandon Ayuk. Maybe those players don't go on to have great normal seasons in the place you're drafting them. Just maybe if you want to play it safer, find guys that are less complicated. People ask me what my favorite team is, right? I say I don't like any of them. I hate them all equally. But if you had to hold me to it, it would change week to week. It's like asking a dishwasher what their favorite plate is. It's the cleanest one. It's the least complicated. It's the one where I know exactly what's going on, and I don't have to sit there and make equivocations and convince myself of things that may or may not be true, right? And we saw it just even this week, like the range of possible outcomes for guys that are questionable. We saw the wide range, right? We saw the James Conner end of the range, where if I was going to last week, James Conner's questionable to me seemed probable, right? He seemed like the most optimistic. I heard Malik Neighbors saying, I'm a real game time decision, something he hadn't said all year. I looked at T. Higgins. I thought, I was doing a one and done draft last week, and I could have taken Higgins, only one who could have taken him. Thought, well, I'll just wait until he's not questionable. Well, look at how those outcomes can be just about anything. So I need to be more mindful of what I'm hearing, what's being reported, asking myself if it makes sense, putting it into that kind of context. We're never going to predict it all perfectly, Eric. It's never going to happen. But we are trying to make logical decisions. Then to do that, we need to be a little more skeptical about the information we're being fed.
Yeah, I think that's just good life advice, right?
Right.
Like just not even in fantasy football. I've always said for years, everybody has an agenda. So you have to consider the source. You have to consider why this person might be saying this, why this information is coming out at the time it does, and so on and so forth. I think that's really good. That's something to be looking for all of us in 2025. Tom Smith also brings up another one too here. He wants to try to avoid getting players, drafting players that are getting long in the tooth, have an injury history, and if they play on crap offenses. Now, I'm going to say this to you, Tom. I happen to agree with most of that. And quite frankly, if I'm deciding between two players in the draft, Bob, I'm usually going with the younger guy, or I'm going with the guy on the better offense, or I'm going with the guy that it has not been banged up. I think those are just three obvious things that are never a predictor of what is going to come.
Right.
But it is a good probability of what could come. We know that this is a young man's league, and a lot of times, Travis Kelce, with apologies to you, the younger guys usually get it done better than the older guys. The teams that are on the field more and scoring more points, those guys usually get it done better than the guys who are on teams that don't score points. Again, apologies to Brock Bowers. There are outliers to everything, but I think those three things you always need to embody too. When you're sitting at a draft and you're deciding between two or three things, two or three players, ask yourself those questions. Right. Who's on the better offense? What's the age of these guys? What's their injury history been like? Sometimes it's baked into the ADP that certain guys are falling or rising because of that. But I think that's always a good thing to consider when you're on the clock.
I'll run towards that, right, too. Like, so, I am injury agnostic. Injury agnostic doesn't mean I'm stupid, right? I realize the difference between players who are hurt now and players who have a history of being hurt. And I'll take that into account. But for example, Christian McCaffrey's past injuries didn't do him any harm the previous 2 seasons, right? Like, injuries aren't permanent. I know there are people out there who tell you once a player's hurt, they're always hurt. Well, not necessarily so. So you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. And the best thing is when you get maybe a little bit of a value because of those injury histories or because those guys are playing on bad teams. My feeling on the bad teams is I'll skim the surface of bad teams. Just don't mine deep, right? That's, right. There's always a player on every team. Malik Neighbors would like you to know there is a giant who could succeed no matter pretty much what else was going on. And so, or Brian Thomas Jr. would say make the same argument. So, like, I do think there's room for that, but at the right price, at the right time, with moderation, like all things.
I do want to give you a shout out right away at the first segment here. You are the Pros versus Joe's Bourbon League number 3 champion for 2024. Congratulations. Drafting out of the 10th spot. You've been drafting in PVJ for years, Bob. Is this your first league title?
It's my first league title. Finally. Okay. I appreciate Derrick continuing to invite me with my long history of failure. And same with Scott Fish. My Scott Fish Bowl history is not great either. I have many excuses for that, but also, like, it's always a rough room, right? It's these industry type leagues are these Pros versus Joes where the Joes are super motivated, right? And they're also super smart. I've always said about this business, like, the audience pretty much believes that they could be doing my job just as good, if not better than me, if it weren't for some quirk of circumstance, fate, or whatever. And they're not 100% wrong, right? And so being mindful of that, these contests are always great. And I was happy to cobble together a win, which honestly, when I was drafting this team, would have seemed like the least likely of outcomes.
The other thing I'll point out too here, and we'll get into your draft in a second, 3rd place overall for you, Bob, in this competition, and you were the top finishing pro this year. Congratulations to you on that. Sigmund Bloom was the first, he was the highest placing team that did not win his own league So Football Guys had 2 guys in the top 6 in this competition this year. So kudos to you guys over there. You certainly know what you're doing. Now, the draft itself, Darren Armani pointed this out on X. Your draft was the one where
it was insane.
The tight ends were getting pushed up to no end. We had no tight ends in the first round, which I get. We were seeing that a lot last year. Tight end premium scoring with the FFPC. So 5 tight ends in round 2, 3 more in round 3, and then we had 3 more go off in round 4. So we had a total of 11 tight ends off the board before the end of round 4. And Brock Bowers didn't go till round 6. That was a great pick by, I believe, Michael Zuka. Michael Zuka was drafting next to you. But at that point, Bob, you already had 2. You had Kelce and Goddard. So when you saw the tight ends flying, was that your idea? Like, okay, I got to get a second one right away. The way everybody's grabbing these guys. I
did. I had some guys that were my favorites that I thought I could get late still. One panned out, one didn't. But the second tight end I got, I mean, Lord, how I wish I had waited on Brock Bowers. Like Dallas Goedert. When I picked Dallas Goedert, I thought this is the pick that's going to lose me the draft. Honestly, I felt like that was probably my worst pick of the draft. And I was miserable. And this is something that, like, for people who draft a lot, you realize this. You'll go through the first quarter of a draft. You'll think, I'm doomed, right? But by the time you get to the last round, you think, man, there's a little bit of recovery here. This isn't as bad as I thought. And I kind of felt this about this one. I thought I had some pretty decent players, and some of the ones that I thought were going to be way more decent than they were, I thought would save me. Instead, it was other players who I was okay with. I thought they were good values. I had some hope for them. Those were the ones that I didn't necessarily expect to save me were the ones who absolutely saved me.
And I'll go through this with the viewers to tell them some of your best picks here. Obviously, we mentioned. No, we didn't mention, but Puka Nacua in the first round.
Yes.
Obviously, you had him when it mattered. You got Ladd McConkey in round 8. He was great. Cortland Sutton in round 10 was fantastic for you. Darnell Mooney, round 13. The pick right after that, Chuba Hubbard. That could have been the greatest turn of 2024. Yep. Was Mooney
Probably
and Hubbard
was.
there. So that was nice job there. And then your final pick, Tucker Kraft in round 20.
Yes.
You also, I just noticed this now. You took Isaac Garendo in round 19.
I did.
You actually got a couple of weeks out of him.
I did. I honestly, that was the craziest part. This is something that happens when you work with guys like Matt Waldman, who have a really thorough understanding of the rookie class, and you're digging deep and you're discussing these players every week, just like he might be the guy who fits best if something happens. And so I went that direction, and, fortuitous. I feel like, Mike Evans in round 3, Mike Evans probably led me to more success this year than in just about any other player I drafted, because I was so in on that. And that's one of the ones that helped me out. And I felt like I was getting great value in round 3. And this was probably a little bit of an early pick. I think in a lot of drafts I got him later. So, and Alvin Kamara, my first running back off the board, was a guy I've had a lot of confidence in, and I didn't foresee like a 44-point week 2 or anything, but yet I got it. But I also, but what I did see was with Clint Kubiak coming over, running that San Francisco style offense, somebody's got to play the McCaffrey role. There was nobody else there, or at least nobody that Dennis Allen liked even slightly. Sorry, Kendre Miller didn't come until later, but he seemed like a good fit for that offense. The things he did well seemed like they would be a good fit. So I was pretty happy with that pick. Did not feel good about the DeAndre Swift pick that I made. I want to say in round 6. But I thought I was worried about him making the change, no longer running behind that Giants offensive line. And it turns out my concerns were correct, but I still don't feel like I totally overpaid for him in the moment.
I want to and by the way, Pros versus Joes will be back next July. Bob trying to defend his league title there for sure. And we'll have those broadcasts for you right here on the Better Sports Network as well. So you can go back and watch those. Now, specifically about this draft, the tight ends were flying high. We see that you made sure you got a second tight end by round 4. You were one of only 2 teams to do that. You were the second team to double up on tight ends. Team 11 went Kincaid and Ferguson. You went Kelce and Goddard. I think I know how you're going to answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. when you are in tight end premium drafts in 2025, do you let the draft come to you? Do you have to make sure that you have that position sort of like a good handle on it by a certain point in the draft? How are you going to handle drafting tight ends in 2025? Not only because of what happened in this draft, Bob, but what we saw with tight ends in general in 2024, especially with the elite ones.
I think I'm going to treat tight end like a little bit of a unicorn position. I think you almost have to, right? Like, especially, certainly in premium, but even like in regular redraft, I think you're going to want to have one of the top tight ends. You look at the way it played out this year, and it was just so hit or miss. Once you got outside of the top 5, 6, 7, I mean, even as I say 6, 7, I'm thinking, did I really feel great about those guys? Right? Like Bowers, was a lock, right? George Kittle, a lock. Trey McBride, volume king. Jonnu Smith kind of came out of nowhere. We should have seen it. I know Bloom was all over him. I liked him because I've liked him many years in the past, but wasn't sure how he would fit into that offense. Turns out down the stretch, he became the star of that offense, and everyone else was competing for complementary roles. I don't know if that's persistent. Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, who became super touchdown dependent, yet like James Cook, scores a lot of touchdowns. So we use touchdown dependent like a pejorative. And it is, because it makes things dicey. We know that's not a sticky, a persistent stat, but here Mark Andrews is still getting the job done. Sam Laporta started coming on, and I think after that you are taking your chances. Maybe David Njoku, who trouble staying on the field kind of limited him, but when he was on the field, he was monstrous. But I think if I want one of those top 3 or 4 or 5 guys, I'm gonna probably pay for them.
Who are the top 3 or 4 or 5 next year? I mean, McBride, obviously. Bowers is going to be up there.
Kittle.
Kittle, okay. Do you still see Kelce up there as a top 5 guy next year?
No, Kelce's not going to be a top 5 guy next year. I don't think for me.
So I think you name the 3 obvious ones with McBride, with Kittle, and with Bowers. Would we put anybody else up there? I mean, who else, I guess, would round out the top 5 for Bob Harris? For you at this point right now.
I think I'll move Laporta back up in there. I've gained confidence down the stretch, but we're getting already in the undesirable portion of this. And I think David Njoku falls into there for me. You look at his per game scoring average. If we get a season out of this guy, he's going to be a monster. He was 13 points a game, fourth on my rankings in that points per game category. So he would be right up there as well. And I'm interested in Jonnu Smith. I want to be a believer, and I think I would be if I fell outside those 5. But Mark Andrews, I'm worried about. Just seems like the trade has got to slow down at some point. Seems like sometimes these offenses evolve. I felt like this offense evolved early this season to where it became more focused on the wide receiver than it had in the past. Mark Andrews was it. He was the wide receiver 1 on that team. He is no longer the wide receiver 1. So you have to take that into account. So I think those are the guys I trust the most. I love Evan Ingram. I want to see what that offense is going to do. I think injuries this year, just the offensive woes of that team, it was hard to count on pretty much anybody except Superman, Brian Thomas Jr.
Thomas, yeah.
So yeah, I think so. For me, it's Bowers, McBride, Kittle, and I'm probably going to throw Njoku and Laporta in there. But you're going to see me go early on a lot of those top 3 guys for sure.
It's the Jonnu Smith conversation has stirred up something in the YouTube chat right now. Tom Smith wants to know, what was Jonnu Smith's ADP? Well, I can tell you, as of September 5th, again, tight end premium format in the FFPC, he was tight end 24, being drafted in the 15th round, behind the likes of Ben Sinnott, Noah Fant, and Isaiah Likely, Tyler Conklin. Luke Musgrave, for God's sake, was going ahead of him. So Jonnu Smith.
So it's funny about the Musgrave Tucker Kraft thing. And by the way, in this draft that I did, he went in around 14, Jonnu Smith did.
Okay.
And he was on my list. I probably would have taken him right around there. And I liked him an awful lot at that price point. But Tucker Kraft, it was interesting because, we do on the show over the offseason, we get into it with the beat writers. We bring the beat writers in and we dig deep. We keep them for full segments and plumb the depths. And I want to say we got into July or maybe June even, maybe as early as June. And 2 different beat writers said, man, y'all are too high on Luke Musgrave, man. Tucker Kraft's going to have a bigger impact than you think. And I was skeptical, maybe too skeptical. In this case, it was just fortuitous that I, had last pick and I was going to use a tight end. I don't know if anybody who was going in that round was anyone else I was really interested in. I don't know if I'm looking at the round ahead of it. I don't think any of those guys I was excited. Zach Ertz turned out to be one of the great values in this draft, by the way, in the 18th round. And I think people kind of slept on him because of Sanat. Tucker Kraft ended up being the guy. And I don't know that it was all injury related. I think he might have had a bigger role than we would have expected, even if everybody was healthy all year.
He is the more complete tight end,
right,
for sure, on the Packers. Now, Bob, I think you know this, maybe you don't. I live in Northeast Wisconsin. I followed the Packers very closely, and I was the guy. There was plenty of people that said after the NFL draft that Kraft was actually the better guy. And I'm like, well, they took Kraft in the third. They took Musgrave in the second. Musgrave had a freak injury his final year in college. And then this past year, he has kind of two freak injuries, including, was it this year or last year that he had the punctured kidney or something? I mean, I think
that was last year.
Last year. So he's been snake bit. And again, I'd like to be injury agnostic as well. But the fact that Kraft has gotten all these snaps and all this experience, that he's the better blocker, and he's turning into being, maybe not as athletic as Musgrave, but still making big plays when he has to.
That 66-yard touchdown against the Rams was wow.
Yes, it came out of nowhere for some. I wasn't surprised to see it, but I think and now Musgrave is back, and obviously he's missed so much time this year. It's going to be Kraft, for the remainder of the season. Let's go to CJ Stroud here. Let's talk about CJ Stroud, Bob. This was a player that many people were super high on coming into this year. I know there's plenty of people out there that said that he was being drafted at a ceiling, that he was punching above his weight last year. Even despite the addition of Stephon Diggs to this offense, when you throw in him and Nico Collins and Tank Dell, and then you get Joe Mixon to really supercharge this offense, Stroud took a step back this year. We need to look underneath the surface of what happened, because he was a massive disappointment. How can we avoid making a similar mistake at the quarterback position, or maybe another position in 2025 that many of us did with CJ Stroud in 2024?
Right. So I'll just start out by saying he was not the mistake I made for pretty much a lot of the reasons, but nobody was foreseeing the fact that he was going to be last year. He dealt with injuries and attrition at wide receiver. There's always someone who showed up. I think the loss of Noah Brown is something that can't be overlooked here. That was a guy who last year, when other pieces were out, he would come in and turn in big performances no matter what. But I don't know that would have mattered this year, because the offensive line just did not offer the protection, and he was not good with pressure. And they leaned more heavily on the run. I talk a lot about Patrick Mahomes, and almost got myself kicked off of NFL radio on Sirius by suggesting that the Patrick Mahomes is not a fantasy quarterback one. I know he can be two things, people. He can be the best quarterback in the NFL and also not the best quarterback for fantasy, because that offense evolved. It became something else. They were not asking him to throw 50 touchdowns. I think they would have preferred this offense if CJ Stroud had thrown more touchdowns. I just think it didn't work for the combination of reasons. The pressure, the attrition at wide out, it does hurt. When Nico Collins, I think, went out, that was a big hit. And they didn't have that Noah Brown level replacement. I know that sounds silly, but it's Xavier Hutchinson or whoever coming in. They just couldn't come up with big games. And then you lose Stephon Diggs. And Tank Dell never quite seemed to catch fire. And I'm not going to throw his injury in there because I don't think it's like the defining moment, but it's kind of indicative of what was going on. They just didn't have the pieces in the receiving core all at once to get the job done. Joe Mixon early on became the dominant portion of this offense, and they leaned more heavily on him. He seemed to wear down, and the whole offense kind of ground down, or seems to have ground down late this season. So for me, I felt like CJ Stroud was overpriced just because we were buying last year. I always have this stupid saying, don't draft last year's best team, right? Mm-hmm. We're trying to forecast a little bit. And so I was avoiding him. Again, I'm going to come clean and admit that I made mistakes at quarterback. I'm looking at you, Anthony Richardson. But also and look, like even Kirk Cousins, I thought, so we always do the thing where we'll take chances on an Anthony Richardson, earlier in a draft, because there is a wealth of talent available below him that can get the job done. In many cases, for me, that was Kirk Cousins this year. I was wrong. He could not get the job done. right? There were portions of the seasons where he was serviceable, but down the stretch, it just fell apart, right? So I'm going to be a little more judicious in my quarterback drafting this year, because looking at CJ Stroud and looking at Anthony Richardson, and look, Anthony Richardson still has that unbelievable rushing upside. He's got some work to do. And I don't know, based on the latest reporting and some of the things we heard during the season, how interested he is in doing that work. I'm not entirely sure now if the coach, who I thought was in an ideal situation to bring him along, Shane Steichen, who had done great things with Justin Herbert, a big passing quarterback, then done great things with Jalen Hurts, a strong running quarterback, that he could combine all that knowledge to create this Frankenstein monster of an NFL quarterback who, admittedly, they need to work. We all knew he needed to work as a passer, right? And I think he still does. And I'm not going to excuse everything for dropped. Every quarterback has receivers drop passes, but that was an issue for Richardson as well. But more than anything else, Richardson seems to be an issue for Richardson. And I don't know if he's taking games seriously enough. I know there were some quotes in The Athletic today that kind of added to all this, where teammates were going to him and saying, "Look, man, you got to step up," and he was kind of not as responsive as maybe those teammates would have liked. So I think quarterback is another position, kind of like tight end, where you're going to feel a lot better either landing one of those top guys early, and like this year. Like, if you look at the outcomes, Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson weren't all that expensive in, let's say, rounds 3 and 4, right? Given the return you got on investment. Jayden Daniels, who was my pivot when I got overweight on Richardson. So that kind of saved my bacon in a handful of places. But looking for upside guys at a little cheaper price seems like a wiser move. And then playing catch up late in the draft. There's a whole range of guys out there who can deliver reasonable weekly numbers. One of the guys I started buying late in the season as what I thought was my firewall, quarterback was, second quarterback was Bo Nix, just because it seemed like inevitable that he was at least going to be the guy and he would have job security. I thought Bryce Young would have that job security. He did not. Turns out also he didn't need it. He's coming on. He'll be a guy that we'll be looking at next year. But a lot of interesting developments at quarterback. But CJ Stroud's fall from grace, I think he just soared too high. It was the Icarus thing, right? He flew too high as a rookie and was going to be hard pressed to match those numbers in his second year.
He ended up being drafted as quarterback 6 last year. He finished as quarterback 18. So there could be a little bit of a bounce back, especially if you want to wait on quarterback. I'm just looking this over right now, Bob. In FFPC drafts at the end of drafting season, quarterback 13 was Purdy. Quarterback 15 was Goff. And you say that's really good, but I mean, how many more players are there like that? Well, let me introduce you to quarterbacks 27, 28, and 29 this year. Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Bo Nix.
There you have it.
You can get quarterbacks late in drafts, at least in this year. And I bet, maybe you don't get 3 massive payoffs like that in 2025, but I bet you get one. I just got to find out who that's going to be.
Why didn't we believe in Baker after
I think it was Canales. Yeah, I think that's what it was. I think a lot of people
me, it's what it was.
I know for me it was. I'm just saying, I think when you saw the resurgence that he had under Canales, knowing what Canales did with Geno Smith as well. I think a lot of us just assume okay, he's going to take a step back, so there's no reason to draft him. And then even with Chris Godwin going down and Jalen McMillan not coming on until the end of the season, he still was awesome. He was fantastic. And can you attribute some of that to Liam Cohen? Sure, but I think we got to give Mayfield his due as well.
So Liam Cohen, though, was the guy was in with the Rams when he landed there, leaving Carolina, put up the kind of like the start of the Renaissance, that showing up in Los Angeles and starting on 20 hours notice. Right. And, so he did have the connection from Liam Cohen from there, but I'm with you. I didn't see that. And by the way, Canales was one of the reasons I was kind of got into Bryce Young. Very late. Again, third quarterback in Superflex ended up getting a lot of. But like, we should give Canales a ton of credit for that turnaround, but also the things they did to make the turnaround happen, shoring up the middle of that offensive line, finding a running back in Chuba Hubbard, who not only drug me to the championship in the pros versus Joes, but also did great things for the Carolina Panthers. And that's how they did it. That's how he did it in Seattle. And that's how he did it in Tampa Bay. The strong rushing game. So yeah, that's like, we need to pay attention and follow along with these things, it turns out.
There's just so much. I mean, we went in depth with tight end and quarterback. That's just two of the positions we have to look at for 2025. We'll get into much more on that, not only with Bob, but with all our future guests coming up on the show. We're going to step out and take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about your playoff postseason, your postseason lineups that you're submitting with the FFPC, and in general, who are the players to trust? Who are the players to pivot from? Bob Harris from Footballguys and SiriusXM Fantasy will join me next with me here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere.
They're making an FFPC lineup. So if you guys aren't set up with FFPC, use promo code COOP at myffpc.com. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more, and you can play with us over there. I like doing the FFPC Weekly Challenge. I play like all the different DFS type things. In this one, which Nate, you have not played, so here's how it goes. No salary, no draft. You can start anyone you want. The only rule is you cannot start two players from the same team. So it makes for a lot of very difficult decisions because there's a lot of chalk. You got to separate the good chalk from the bad chalk, and there's no stacking. So on one hand, you don't have to worry about playing against somebody that starts like Burrow and Chase, and Chase Burrow throws 5 touchdowns to Chase. Like, that can't happen here, but we also can't use that for leverage. You got to kind of navigate around it. We finished in the money with Dave Kluge. We finished in the money with Bob Harris. We come very close with some other lineups, and here's what we do with that, Nate. If you come in third or fourth in these contests, so we're in a 30-person contest. If you come in third or fourth, they either give you $100 or they give you an entry into a $125 buy-in best ball for next year. So if like with Bob Harris, we won that, and he's like, no, don't take the money. We're going to run that again and do a show in the offseason. If you come in second, you get the same thing. You could take $300 or $350 Fantasy Pros main event, which we'd probably do that. And then as we worked out the deal last week with Linda and Wyatt, if we win the $600, we just take that and we spend it on drinks at a big party at the Expo.
All right, I'm game for that. So if we win the 2 low, let's push it on. If we take the 600, it's drinks at the Expo. I love that.
You talk about utilizing something called perpetual reloading to ensure something called a permanent championship window with FFPC Dynasty Leagues. How do we make sure that perpetual reloading is what we're doing in our rookie drafts every year to make sure that we're always competing for titles year in and year out?
Yeah, so we always have this tension between playing a little bit for the future and playing for the present. You'll have drafters jump into the startup. They'll draft the veterans. They're trying to win in that first year. Sometimes they do. I don't want to in any way, shape, or form suggest that doesn't work, because you see some of those teams compete and win titles. And yet, when we're thinking about the best way to control your chances to win, you want to be in the playoffs year after year. You want your championship window to always be open. You don't want to get to a point where you build, and then have a couple of years where you're going for it and then you're rebuilding again. You want to be in it every year. You want to get as many buys as possible so you don't have to compete in that quarterfinal round. You build a more powerful team. You can't control the injury that you have to the key player that cost you a title, or the 50-point game that a non-elite player like Amari Cooper scores and knocks you out. You can control having one of the best teams every single season. The way that you do that is you build depth in your player talent across all those positions. You build depth in your picks. In order to execute some of those types of things, you trade down, you trade peak players, you trade young players. You've got to trade things that people want. A lot of times I think when people are trying to reload or rebuild, they're trying to trade distressed assets at a level that the rest of the group isn't interested in, and then you feel like you can't move. If you're going to make trades, you got to trade things that people.
Welcome back to the Better Sports Network's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. He is Bob Harris from Footballguys, the football diehard on the X machine. You hear him on SiriusXM. By the way, I should ask you this too. weeknights, 10 p.m. to midnight. Is that what it is, Bob?
That is correct. And that'll be changing a little bit as the times will be the same. We'll be off a few nights here through January until we get into our off-season schedule. But the big change will be Saturday nights. We've usually been on from 8 to 11. We're switching to Sunday mornings. Not this week, but the following week. It'll be at 10 to noon. On Sundays.
On Sundays. Perfect. So that's where you can hear Bob and check out his work, footballguys.com as well. The thing I want to talk about now is the FFPC, the world famous FFPC Playoff Challenge. And this is going to help everybody, no matter if you're playing in that or not, which we encourage you to do so at myffpc.com. Remember, you're submitting just one lineup for the entire postseason. Enter for $200, win $500,000. Enter for $35, win up to $100,000 there as well. Now, you can only play one player per team in the playoffs. And obviously, we don't know every single team that's in the playoffs yet, Bob, but I want to talk about these teams and these players for sure. When you look at the Chiefs, we know that they're probably not playing starters this week, or at least limited. They have the number 1 seed wrapped up, home field advantage all the way through until the Super Bowl. If you could only pick one Chief and you don't want to go chalk everywhere, given his resurgence late in the season, given his ascendance late in the season, is Xavier Worthy a literal X factor for people who can only pick one Chief this year? When you think about, Mahomes, Kelce, Pacheco, boy, there's something there with Worthy, even with Marquise Brown back.
Yeah, it was like a 3-week rise, right? And well worth the price of admission over that 3 weeks. Wide receiver 10 from weeks 15 through 17 was drawing tons of targets, was making big plays. I feel like it's real. I feel like it's not a mirage. Even with Hollywood coming back that last, the game, his return game, he had the 5-catch game. We still got a pretty good output from Xavier Worthy. I think he is the piece that I'm more interested in. Certainly, the backfield's a mess. Hard to count on either Isaiah Pacheco. I do think we'll see a more concerted effort to use Isaiah Pacheco. I think that's why we haven't seen it to this point, was to get him into the postseason. But I'm not feeling Travis Kelce. I'm not feeling any of the other wideouts, particularly. It might be Hollywood if it's somebody not named Xavier Worthy. And then that's pretty much where I'm at. I mean, Kareem Hunt has been apparently hard to bench.
He has been. And I didn't see that coming either. Kareem Hunt, too. I mean, I know a lot of his fantasy goodness during the regular season was when Pacheco was hurt. But I put in a lot of just keep him honest bids in my leagues and ended up getting Hunt. And I was happy I got him. And then obviously it changed a little bit when Pacheco got back, but maybe not as much as a lot of people were thinking. You mentioned Kelce, that you're not feeling him this year. And it just seems like every single year it's Mahomes and Kelce leading the Chiefs to another Super Bowl. You are unconvinced of Travis Kelce's dominance in the playoffs this year. Is it the age thing or is it something else?
It's more the age thing and the wearing down portion of it. And I don't think he's been bad, right? This is more a case of, again, life is a funny thing. The better you manage your expectations, the happier you are. It works in fantasy football as well, right? And our expectations maybe were a little overblown for Travis Kelce. I don't want to overblow them going to the playoffs. He does tend to be more of a factor. He was definitely a huge factor last year. Like Noah Gray seems like a thing. And I remember a couple of years ago, joking, or the guys, we like to call him the next Travis Kelce or future Travis Kelce, right? Noah Gray. Are we seeing more signs of that? Could we see more signs of him as a scoring threat in this offense? I don't know. I think, look, again, tight end is a mess this year. So probably, as you head into the postseason, just, going over the names in my head, I don't see a lot of guys that I would trust a heck of a lot more. But also, I don't know that I want to put all my eggs in the Kelce basket.
Which makes sense. I mean, it's all about diversification. And if you are in multiple playoff challenges, it would make just sense that you wouldn't load up on Kelce maybe in years past when you would. Similar to that, a player that people have loaded up on at their quarterback in the playoff challenge in the past has been Josh Allen. Not necessarily because Allen has been so awesome, which he has been, but because a lack of other playmakers, a lack of other talent around him. And then Stephon Diggs leaves this year, so you don't have Diggs. If you are fading Josh Allen, Bob, and you're not utilizing him as your quarterback, and you have an opportunity to go for another bill, James Cook is available, Khalil Shakir. You go with Dalton Kincaid. You go with the Bills defense, quite frankly, or Tyler Bass if you wanted to do that. But if you fade Josh Allen, one, is that the right move? And number two, who are you pivoting towards if you can only have one Bill?
Well, there are quarterbacks who can play at his level. So, I mean, so I can see how that might happen. I have a hard time fading Josh Allen just in general, but there are other really good quarterbacks. It's James Cook is the guy, right? I mean, like I talked about a little bit a few minutes ago, we think, like I feel like I've had a blind spot for James Cook. He has cured my vision. He has aided my vision in recent weeks. 16. He keeps scoring, but the running ability got better. Plus the ability to create explosive plays. He has like 40+ yard rushing touchdowns this year. I mean, he's getting it done. And part of the concern is, Josh Allen's going to vulture those touchdowns at the goal line. Well, he's not vulturing the ones from 50 yards out. Right. So I think I'm sold, but part of it is just like, who else do I like? I do like Khalil Shakir, but like any given week, it could be just about anyone except Dalton Kincaid.
Why can't it? Because this is interesting. Why can it not be Dalton Kincaid? That was another, again, a tight end that people drafted early this year that were highly disappointed at. And I don't know why that happened, because with Diggs gone, it should have opened more stuff up for Kincaid, and that didn't happen.
Yeah, I don't know why. Like every beat writer I talked to leading into the season, I don't think you would find a guy who didn't say that Dalton Kincaid was going to be the leading target getter in this offense. But I did hear like Ryan O'Halloran from the Buffalo News kind of said, be careful though, because he's not the guy. He's not the boundary guy. He's not the corner of the end zone kind of guy. He's a down the middle of the field. He might not be the scoring threat you're looking for in fantasy circles. And I was hopeful for Keon Coleman because of that conversation. And I think in the future, I'm going to be really hopeful for Keon Coleman. I'm not hopeful enough to trust him now. I mean, I do think Josh Allen has an affinity for him and likes throwing him the football. He's going to win those 50-50s and, the physical presence. But what happened with Kincaid is confounding. Like aside from the health, just can't see, like also catching all the balls would help him. And he hasn't, the catch rate hasn't been there either. So it's been a weird thing. He's going to be like someone who mentioned earlier, I can't off the top of my head, but there's going to be lists of players that we all make after seasons of players who disappointed us, who came up short and didn't give us the desired outcomes. He's going to be one of those, and I'm going to be looking to get a huge steal on him in drafts and hope for the rebound.
I think that's the other thing we need to keep in mind too. And Rubio, who was in here earlier, and I don't have the quote, the exact post that he made, but it was something, and I love Rubio. He's in here a lot, but he said, Richardson is dead to me. Kyler Murray is dead to me too. And I get the feeling, especially this time of year, right? It's the feelings are I have hurt feelings over some fantasy players this year as well. But I think the important thing is each year in redraft is a new year. Dalton Kincaid's ADP, CJ Stroud's ADP, Anthony Richardson's ADP. It's all going to be different next year. I think Matthew Berry says that, right? I don't hate players. I hate ADPs. Right. And you should always be searching for those deals, especially these proven players. I mean, CJ Stroud's a proven player coming off down years. Like that's how you win.
Right. I always use this same stupid analogy, so I'll keep using it, but I want to be the fantasy fireman. I want to run into the burning building of value and drag that guy out of there and at the right price. And that's the thing, at the right price. And that is the first thing I do when a season's over. I sit down and I take a few minutes and I look at all my rosters. I look at the overall rankings and the final output of all the players. I say, boy, people are going to be really mad about that. And I make the list of those people that I think I'm going to get huge discounts on. And I'm willing to go down and chase them. And again, I said it earlier, I don't draft last year's best team, draft next year's best team. Mm-hmm. Some of those guys who disappointed us this year are going to be on next year's best teams. They're going to be some of next year's best players. I don't know what, like you sit there, you go through the list and you start telling yourself the happy stories and the sad stories that either convince you that somebody's going to rebound or not. And you make those choices, but you do it at a better price. And, we always talk about it, the post-hype sleepers, I think that's I don't really think it's that. I think there's more. I think that's an oversimplification, right? But there are players that people get mad at, that they feel like abandoned them. And this year, there's going to be many that I feel like abandoned me, and I'm going to be more than willing to go out and draft them because I'm going to get a better deal on them.
I was thinking about this. Well, I should say this. When I put down our show rundown together last night, and then I was looking at it again today, and I was thinking about this as far as Ravens go in the postseason. It's going to come down to Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, right? I mean, Lamar Jackson is a legit MVP candidate. Derrick Henry in most other years would probably be a top 5 MVP candidate, but we've gotten so much great play from, Barkley and Darnold and so on and so forth. But then I think, like, if you're pivoting off those two guys that are going to be so heavily owned, Zay Flowers is the first Pro Bowl receiver the Ravens have ever had. Mark Andrews is coming into. We were talking about him earlier too, and tight end premium in the FFPC Playoff Challenge. He's compelling. Maybe this isn't a 2-horse race here for the Ravens. We got to think about those other two guys, and Flowers and Andrews as well.
Right. Andrews was one that I would definitely think about if I'm looking to avoid Henry. He seems like again, touchdown dependent, yet scores a lot of touchdowns. Mm-hmm. And you can go back. There's something else to hang your hat on. The history that he has with Lamar Jackson, who for more than a couple of years, looked at him whenever it counted most, right? And I think there's other, like Rashad Bateman has shown up. He's not a player that we can play necessarily every week, but he's a player that Lamar Jackson might look to it every week. So I think those receiving assets, that's the concern. Is it going to be spread too thin because they don't throw the ball as much because they're leaning into Derrick Henry? So for me, it would probably be Andrews because it feels like a comfortable, warm old shoe or something. Like I've done this before. I trust it. But Zay Flowers definitely should be in the conversation.
The thing I also wanted, because I was looking at the previous winners of the challenge last year in the FFPC, and both at the $35 level and the $200 level, they both had the exact same lineup. That lineup included Puka Nacua last year. Now, if we look at the NFL playoff bracket last year, we know that the Rams were one and done. Last year, they had one game, they lost to Detroit, and that was it. However, Nacua had a massive game. Is Nico Collins this year's Puka Nacua, where he has a massive game, and I don't know who they're going to be playing in the first round, but I know it'll be a home game. Nobody's picking Stroud. Maybe a few people have Mixon, but knowing that you're not going to have Diggs, you're not going to have Tank Dell. Nico Collins could have a Nacua-esque game 1, and maybe he gets to round 2. I mean, you never know. But how do you sort of handicap the Texans in a playoff challenge if you can only pick one? I think Collins would be my favorite, but I could also look towards Fairbairn or the Texans defense as well.
It would probably be Collins for me. I mean, I think one of the things I like about him is we can see he get out of a 2-catch, 14-yard game, and both of them might be touchdowns, right? Mm-hmm. So it's slim pickings, not aside from him in the wide receiving core. And maybe that makes Dalton Schultz that much more appealing, right? Maybe that's a guy we should be looking at. Joe Mixon, I feel like, has slowed down. And I hope he proves me wrong. Joe Mixon, this is your challenge, sir. Bob Harris is out here doubting you. So take that to heart and use it because you're all the motivation you need. But in all seriousness, I do think Nico Collins is the guy that has the potential to bust your lineup open, right? And turn you into a huge week any given week.
But Tom, I promise you we'll bring up Jayden Reed because I have an important thing to say about him and the Packers in a little bit. Before we get to him, the Steelers, we know they're in. I think they're a little fraudulent as a team this year, Bob. I think they're a really good team. I was talking with a guy who used to work in Pittsburgh radio, and he works in Northeast Wisconsin radio now, and he's a big Steelers fan. And he says he views the Packers and Steelers as two of the teams in the NFL that are not on the elite tier, but they're right at the top of that second tier. Probably not good enough to win a Super Bowl, but good enough to compete. And if that's the case, I really can't make a good case for any Steelers in a postseason challenge when you consider that they win with their defense.
That's who you're playing.
That's who it is, right? Okay, so Harris is out, Warren, Pickens, all those guys, Freiermuth. Right. You got to play the Pittsburgh defense here.
That's me. I like of all the defenses, like what are you looking for in defenses? Disruptive playmakers, right? Guys that can come in and change the game. You have those multiple options of that on the Steelers defense. No, not the least of which, obviously, TJ Watt. So yeah, I'm probably playing that. I feel really comfortable every time I roll a Pittsburgh defense out in any contest, any league. I feel like I'm probably going to be okay.
Right. Exactly. The final team we'll talk about here, and we don't know who the last team is going to be in, whether it's going to be Denver, Cincy, or whoever. But I will bring up the Chargers. Ladd McConkey was a monster. You got him in I think that we said there was the 8th round of Pros versus Joes in the league that you won. Did you get McConkey on a bunch of teams this year, Bob?
I got him on a handful of teams. Yes.
Handful. Okay.
This is the Waldman influence working on me. Waldman's been in on him all along. I felt like I would prefer to draft like 15 or 16-year-old receivers as opposed to like the 12 and 13-year-olds the McConkey represented. But it turns out, look, I'm looking forward to his first healthy season. He's going to be a killer in this league. But also, one of the things that Waldman pointed out that I think bears watching, we all decided that, here, and this is something we do. It's fantasy managers, right? And I want to talk about it. It's take lock. We get this idea in our head that, okay, here we have this regime coming in, this Harbaugh Roman regime. Look back at the past numbers of the run versus pass ratios. It hasn't been great, right, for the passing side of things. That's ignoring the fact that these guys are pretty thinking, thoughtful coaches who know how the game works and everything. But I mean, we went back to Harbaugh, Jim Harbaugh. I went back to like Stanford, looking at the passes per game for Andrew Luck, who apparently was a very good quarterback back then, was like 30 or fewer a game, right? So I just didn't see it. Well, we saw it down the stretch where they got there eventually, right? They got up over that 30 pass a week number. So I think a lot of people were just dialed out on this in general. But if you go back to those teams, who are the receivers that fared well? The Crabtrees of the world, the slot receivers in those offenses tended to be the guys who led the way. And so I felt like if anyone was there that I trusted, because it wasn't Quentin Johnston, I mean, he was the only one that was kind of on the radar. It was definitely McConkey. And I felt like this was kind of like a semi-contrarian play because everyone was out on this passing attack. Just for all that range of reasons. And what was Justin Herbert's ADP? Was he like quarterback 16, 17, 18?
He was another guy I was going to bring up who went fairly low. I think he was quarterback. I got it right in front of me. Quarterback 17 this year.
I mean,
and I'll bring this up too, Bob. The Chargers passing offense found its way at the end. But the rushing offense, like the Roman stamp was still there.
Oh, for sure.
Too. You know what I mean?
For sure. But I mean, I think all these, like I talk about the take lock. You get caught up on a player or a situation or a circumstance. And just like for us, I like to remind everyone, being right and being wrong in what we're doing are temporary conditions. They are not permanent, right? Even within a season, what we're right on, a player that we're in on can be out and then in and then out and then in again over the course of a season. There's ebbs and flows to all this. And so we tell ourselves these stories that I talk about to draft or not draft players, and we carry that over and we decide that player is that thing. Players evolve, seasons evolve, coaches evolve, things change over the course of time. Adjustments are made, injuries, attrition, circumstances dictate these changes be made. And guess what? Players rise to those occasions and change with them. So what I've decided about a player going into a season, that's all well and good. And I should start out with that as a starting point. But that doesn't mean it's the end point. I need to be open to the possibility that players are going to change, evolve, and figure things out. And coaches are going to figure things out and make the necessary adjustments to have at least some degree of success. But don't talk yourself into like being out. I'm out on this passing attack, right? Like I use the examples, and the thing I hammer every year is especially in drafting. This is a lesson I learned that I don't pay attention to. In drafting, I'm big on go after wide receivers regardless of the quarterback. Less than ideal quarterbacks don't destroy wide receivers. Sometimes it's because the quarterbacks play better. We can go back to the Geno Smith season you mentioned when Tyler Lockett and Mike Evans or DK Metcalf were both like inside the top 15 in that comeback player of the year season. We were drafting those guys way late. Mike Evans, the first year with Baker Mayfield last year, guy you could get for nothing, right? And so because people were scared of the quarterbacks, that's why I got a deal on Neighbors, I'm pretty sure, this year. But the poster child of this is Adam Thielen last year playing with Bryce Young, arguably the worst starting quarterback in the NFL all year. Adam Thielen was wide receiver 12 through 12 games. He finished as wide receiver 17. right? On a horrible offense with a quarterback that barely broke double digits in touchdown passes. Like, it happens. But also, I need to trust that I'm the guy who might have faded Brian Thomas Jr. like in week 15 or 16 because he was playing with Mac Jones for that reason.
Yeah.
Right? Like, a good player. So, and like, I will say that strategy is more of a draft position, but I think I need to be carrying that into the seasons and making lineup decisions. I need to be less fearful of these situations, but it's what we do, Eric. We talk ourselves into a position and we hold on to it like a pit bull. We're not going to let go of that. We have to be ready to let go of our positions when they're obviously not coming to pass the way we expected.
I think just in general, just like for my local sports talk radio show, I tend not to, it's probably not that interesting to listen to because I tend not to be very flag planty, right?
Correct.
And because I know things change. And
Right.
as you pointed out, and I looked at this all season, you look in week 4, week 5, Bob, oh God, this guy is a total bust this year. And then by
Right.
week 10, you're like, this guy turned out to be a value. And then by
Yep.
week 16, nope, he was a bust. You know, like it happened, like players switch several times during the season. It's a long season. It's almost getting longer now too, as we look at it. But I think that's important to understand that the ebbs and flows of the fantasy season happen every single year. And you got to be able to roll with the punches here.
I'm old enough to remember when Mark Andrews was one of the worst tight ends in fantasy football for the first month of the season.
Yeah. It's totally true. Right. And we have to understand that just because you have a bad September does not guarantee you a bad October, November, December as well. Sometimes it happens.
And
But
like
more
even a
often
kid
than
like
not, it's not.
Ladd McConkey, even still not yet out of puberty, can be a dominant force in a run heavy offense.
That is the AFC look that we have as we wrap things up with Ladd McConkey, as Bob just pointed out. Before we get to the NFC portion, Rubio is pointing out on YouTube a draft question for 2025. Are we thinking about changing our draft strategy next season if we were 0 RB guys? I think with more teams using too high shell coverage these days is making the running back relevant again. Rubio, thank you for this, and I'm glad you brought this up. I like to do 0 RB in at least one league every single year just to see how it turns out. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's not so great. What I do like to do in most of my leagues is go with hero RB, where I'm taking a running back in the first couple of rounds. That's my cornerstone, and then I'm building up receivers after that, especially in leagues I have to start 3 receivers in. This year, Bob, I had a lot of running backs on my team that I drafted knowing that there was going to be windows and pockets where I'd be able to start them when the starter would get hurt or would miss time for whatever reason. It didn't happen for a lot of these guys. Emmanuel Wilson Josh Jacobs never went down, right?
No.
You had all these guys that, I should say all these guys, but a lot of guys that just never developed this year. Now when you have the NFL again changing where the running back is having a bit of a resurgence here, maybe running back is more important in fantasy leagues. Maybe we need to start paying attention to it. Some of the better teams in the FFPC this year loaded up on running backs early. Is that something that we need to take a long, hard look at and say, hey, we need to be focusing more on this position rather than just having this anti-fragile strategy and going with these running backs in the mid to late rounds?
I think like most things, there's a combination that's going to be key to unlocking your season, right? The success. And I'm with you. I like a hero. I like, this year, Derrick Henry was my hero in many a draft. And I'm very happy where that happened. But part of that strategy too is, as you said, I want to get a really loaded wide receiver. So targeting ambiguity late at running back is going to be something that we should keep doing. And in the FFPC draft, the Pros versus Joes I was in, Chuba Hubbard was one of those pieces that I was targeting late, who, like, we didn't know what was going on with Jonathan Brooks. We were hearing great things, but we weren't sure about it. And who else was there? And that one played out. But I can think of other drafts I was in where I was hammered by JJ Zacharyson because he had some pieces like Chase Stroud where he was, we weren't sure what that backfield was going to look like. Right. And so, but you were getting the pieces at a discount because we didn't know what it was going to look like. And so I think taking some chances on those ambiguous backfields, more so than like the situations where we're trying to play for the contingent upside if somebody gets hurt. Yeah. Right. I think that's always been the thing and I'm still doing that as well. But I think the focus for me is going to be more on the ambiguous backfields, the Pollard Spears backfields, where you're going to get some run out of both of them at some point, or the Chase Brown, less so Zach Moss be on the Chase Brown side of that one in the future. But and even then, like there's going to be backs like, you know, later, like we didn't know what was going to happen. We kind of thought Devin Singletary was going to be the guy in New York. So I didn't view Tyrone Tracy as a guy that was going to cut into that workload. But kind of there came a point in drafts where, wow, there's not a lot else left. I think I'll take a shot on him. That ambiguity worked out well for you and turned out into something else. So doesn't happen every time. Not every one of them is going to be a winner. You're going to have to be prepared to work the waiver wire and figure it out. But I think drafting more of those ambiguous backfields is something I'm going to be trying to do later in drafts.
I think that's a great point too. God, you know, you said Chase Brown, and I had to even think about it. I'm like, God, who was the other one? Because it seems like it was so long ago when it was Zach Moss. Yeah.
The funny thing about that one is, like, and it's something I'm always reminded of if you're doing this kind of thing year round. Like, I was a Chase Brown guy when they let Mixon go. Listening to people, Paul Denner Jr. from The Athletic and other reporters on the scene, this is why Joe Mixon left, because Chase Brown, who had second fastest speed recorded last year on the old next gen stats device, on that screen pass he took for a touchdown. Mm-hmm. Like, they wanted that explosive ability. They felt like that was lacking in their backfield. So I was pretty much sold on the notion that Chase Brown was going to see a lot of work. Even if he didn't play the primary role, he was going to see enough to make us happy at the price we're paying. And then they go out and they sign Zach Moss. And listening again to some of the beat writers who were suggesting, well, they feel like maybe Zach Moss also has that explosiveness, but maybe with more power. Like, I let it cloud me. And I was all in on Chase Brown in best balls like in May. And then we got into June and July. I was kind of dialed out on him. And then I started sitting in drafts with JJ going, why is he taking that guy right before? And you start, you made the subtle shift. So I have plenty of shares of both, but I think those are the backfields that, that can help you out in times of need down the stretch.
It's something definitely to keep in mind too. And by the way, that Pollard Spears backfield, that's not going anywhere. That's going to be back in 2025 Correct. For sure. Let's get into the NFC portion of our playoff challenge early preview here, as we are still about 9 days away from playoff football. I guess I say still 9 days away. We're only 9 days away. Can't wait for it. Which Lion is the right Lion to roster? Because there are a bunch of them, Bob, from Jared Goff to Jahmyr Gibbs. Thankfully, no David Montgomery. I mean, not thankfully. I wish him nothing but the best, but it definitely gives you more clarity on the situation in Detroit. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jamison Williams. The firepower of the Lions, and we'll see if their defense, I know Anzalone and Hutchinson are trying to get back for the playoffs. But that defense right now, it's just ripe for shootouts. It's ripe for giving up yardage and points, which means the Lions are outscoring people too. Getting the Lion right in your playoff challenge this year might be the key to winning it. Who are the guys that you're looking at? Who's the guy that you would put above everybody else? Is it Gibbs?
Let me lean into the microphone so you can hear me clearly. All of them. Whichever one you get, right? The one you get. Play the one you get. And I want to just looking at the numbers, we're talking about last week, 5th game of the year with 40 plus points this season, right? They score in a variety of ways. And we saw the hook and lateral thing, right? And so we got Williams, Jamison Williams, the second player in franchise history to log at least 5 touchdowns of 40 or more yards in a season. St. Brown scored his 33rd touchdown of his career. He's in a tie with Calvin Johnson already. Sam Laporta, the 5th Lions player with at least 7 touchdowns this season, the most to reach that number in a season in franchise history. Jahmyr Gibbs, we all see what he's doing. David Montgomery's going to be back. And by the way, don't stop there. I mean, Jared Goff, quarterback 1 over 15 through weeks 15 through 17, the league winning quarterback, right? Like ahead of all those other guys you were into. But let's not stop there. Let's dig all the way down. How about Jake Bates?
Why not? Right?
135 points, passing Jason Hansen for the most points scored in franchise history. 3 field goals of 55 yards or more. Play the one you can get.
Yeah, which makes perfect sense. And I think that of all the teams in the playoffs this year, that's probably going to have the team with the most diversity. There's only a handful of guys on the Chiefs. The Bills, there's even less. Maybe the Ravens, but I still think the Lions have more options there than Baltimore. So certainly there's a lot of and what about this next team? Because there's some options here with the Eagles too. Now they're probably going to have to play. It's looking like the Packers. The Packers just absolutely rocked Dallas in the first round of the playoffs last year. But that's when Jordan Love was playing like Super Saiyan quarterback, and he's not at that level right now. The Packers have this newfound run game with Josh Jacobs that is different from the Aaron Jones ground game, and Green Bay has become a power running football team that has its passing game play off that rather than vice versa, which is, I think, what it was last year. The Eagles will try to keep the Packers offense off the field. The Packers will try to keep the Eagles offense off the field. And whoever wins that time of possession, I think, is probably going to win that game. Easier said than done, right, to keep Philly's offense off the field. I'm assuming Jalen Hurts will have cleared concussion protocol by then, Bob. I don't know, but that would be my guess. You have A.J. Brown, and you have this guy, Saquon Barkley, who just became, the 9th player ever to rush for 2,000 yards in one season. It's a hard pivot. It's going to be hard to get away from Barkley. But I do think there's some goodness there with Brown and Devonta Smith as well.
I do too. Jairus Alexander now getting the surgery. I think that's kind of going to be a limiting factor for that defense. They'll keep trying to cobble it together, but I think that's definitely something that's going to hurt them. Like, if everything's working right in this offense, picking your poison here, and that includes Devonta Smith, who I was out on last week because I thought Kenny Pickett seemed to show the most affinity for Brown, and turns out it was a 1-game sample and I'm stupid. But I think all those pieces are great pieces. I'm worried about the Packers. It's interesting about the Packers. You're there. You tell me this. I feel like what they're doing now is what Matt LaFleur always wanted to do, is have that running, that piece that could dominate on the ground and then pick your plays to make big plays with a variety of big play weapons, which is why it's hard to trust any Packer wide receiver, because they're going to play whack-a-mole with those guys.
Right. Well, and number one, I think you're totally right. I don't think this is a perfect analogy, but when you have clay and you're working with clay and you let it dry for a while and it gets kind of old, you can still shape it a little bit, but you can't shape it as much as you could when it's young and fresh and fungible, like Jordan Love was compared to Aaron Rodgers. So, and I think Rodgers changed a lot of those plays for LaFleur, and LaFleur, he let him do it because he's 4-time MVP, what have you. But now you're running an offense that I think is, and I don't think LaFleur likes that. I don't think he's like, oh, he's running the LaFleur offense. I don't think he likes that when people refer to it, because he's like, I've always been running my offense. But I don't know if he has. I think you're right. I think this is what he had in mind. This is what he always wanted to do. To answer, I think it was Tom Swift's question before, Jaden Reed, another clunker this week. Here's the thing about Green Bay, and this is why Christian Watson, I think, is the key to how deep the Packers go in the postseason. Minnesota played a ton of man coverage against the Packers in week 17. And Jordan Love said after the game, guys just weren't winning. Like, he took an ill-advised shot to Bo Melton in that game into double coverage. And he said, like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have thrown it, but I look at my receivers and they just weren't winning their one-on-ones. This is not something that is foreign to Green Bay. Like, we've heard this before. Outside of Devonta Adams, there wasn't a whole lot of guys that were winning one-on-one matchups. Jaden Reed, if you look at his numbers this year, when he's facing man coverage, I mean, you wonder why he's on the field at all. Right. And he had a couple of bad drops this past game too. So when you're rolling man coverage against Green Bay and the man beater, Christian Watson, the field flipper, isn't out there, you can really run into some problems if you're the Packers offense. And I think Minnesota did a great job exposing that. So they need Watson on the field for sure.
For sure. Well, yeah, Watson, one of my 9th round guys that I was locked in on. Fortunately, there were 2 guys I was locked in on in the 9th round. One of them's name was Jameson Williams, and that one paid off. But, like, I do think Watson could be that guy, right? Like, any given week, and we're getting into the 9th round of drafts. You're not looking for an everyday starter. You're looking for a guy, when you use him, can deliver. Here's the thing. The scientists fixed the hamstrings last year. So trust in the science, work on the hands, maybe a hand scientist, and see if we can't get everything together next year. Because honestly, when you look at Christian Watson, the size, the speed, the athleticism, he is the difference maker in that offense, or he has the potential to be the difference maker in that offense, especially an offense that's designed to lean into the run and make big plays on occasion.
Right. Yeah. And that's all he'll have to do. And that keeps everything else fresh. That's how Romeo Dobbs and Reed and Wicks get open, right?
Correct.
Is having him out there. Kraft as well as another guy too. And obviously the Jacobs ground game helps too. Let's move on and talk about the Rams, Puka Nacua or Kyren Williams. You can only have one. If you're only picking one in a playoff challenge where you can only roster one player, Bob, who would it be? Would it be Nacua or would it be Kyren Williams? Or I guess Cooper Kupp will throw in there too.
It's Puka. It's
because he's just that dominant. He's just that
is.
dominant of a player right now.
He is. He's the only one. Like, I trust Kyren Williams, but if you maybe pick between the two, it's Nacua is the one I trust more.
Nacua was on the champions last year in the FFPC for both the 100K and the 500K winning teams. That's who their Ram was. Given the how successful the Buccaneers passing game has been as of late, and quite frankly, all season, Bob, with Mayfield, with Mike Evans, and with Cade Otton to a certain extent, do we fade the Buccaneers running backs knowing that there's Rachaad White and Bucky Irving back there, or do you like one of those better than the other in postseason football?
In week 18, we don't fade them,
right.
but in the playoffs, like if I'm choosing between the passing attack and the rushing attack, it's the passing attack, right? And I think there are multiple pieces. You mentioned, Cade Otton seemed to fall off the cliff when Evans returned, and now with Jalen McMillan emerging as a pretty consistently productive player. I mean, what are we looking at over the last 3 or 4 weeks? Is he like wide receiver 12, 13, somewhere in that range over that span, and hasn't limited Mike Evans at all? That seems to be the direction Baker Mayfield's looking. Look, like Cade Otton is a very good player, and I don't want to be dismissive of him, especially in a narrow pool, a narrow band of players available in a postseason. But you're playing a little bit of hope there and hoping that he can come back around and contribute at the levels he did while Evans was out. It was like a 25+% target share without Evans, and it's fallen off the face of the earth.
Right. Yes, it has, for sure. I did start Michael Penix in a league last week because I didn't have Anthony Richardson, and there weren't any good quarterbacks to pick up. A lot of them were locked for the remainder of the season. I got it done, but by the skin of my teeth. However, what I'm seeing from Penix, Bob, is stuff I'm liking. I'm liking the involvement of London. I'm liking how Kyle Pitts maybe isn't relevant, but he's the next thing closest to relevancy. And Bijan Robinson is showing up. I don't think Penix has looked too bad. Your expectations not only for this week and potentially the postseason for Atlanta with Penix, but next season as well.
I think the week-to-week improvement is what I'm expecting. If we went from a weak-armed right-hander to a rocket-armed left-hander, that's a difference for the receiving assets, right? Those guys have to figure out how to catch that ball. You can go all the way back to when even I was almost young. The switch from Joe Montana to Steve Young. I mean, it was like a similar difference, and it was adjustment. Jerry Rice talked about it, like how the ball comes in and making that adjustment. I think as the players make that adjustment, the volume though for Drake London, Penix's first start, Drake London played a half, had 8 targets in a half. That kind of tells you the direction this is going. I will not thrust Kyle Pitts into the trustworthy category. He's a dart toss still for me, but Bijan and London are locked in plays. And Penix is going to get a little better. I don't know if he's going to get better enough to help us in the postseason. I would hate to have to trust it, but it is possible.
He's one of those guys that could be, the 20-some quarterback drafted next year that could end up being a big guy for you down the stretch. We don't know if the Falcons will make the playoffs. We do know the Vikings are in, and they boast arguably the best 1-2 combo of receivers in the NFL, although Cincinnati and Los Angeles might have something to say about that. But Jordan Addison has been so involved, especially the second half of the season. Addison over Jefferson, I think, is a sneaky play, especially if Minnesota is like 1 and done or maybe 2 games. I could see Addison outperforming Jefferson in those games.
Yeah, I could too. I mean, any given week, I could see that happening. And, if you're, depending on what kind of contest you're playing in, if you're playing a DFS contest, the price is going to be better for you. So I'm all about that. I'm with you. I like Addison this week. And I will like him going into the playoffs. He's turned into the thing that they expected him to be. Imagine that, an evolution. And even with Jefferson picking up the pace in recent weeks, it hasn't kept Addison from making plays,
which has been great. And we knew how talented Addison could be, and he is showing that potential is becoming kinetic, for lack of a better word, right now. It's been great. The Commanders are also in. In fact, they're probably going to be the 6th seed, taking on the Rams in the first round, what we think is going to be the Rams in the first round. Jayden Daniels has been unbelievable. I also understand if you can't switch your lineup for the entire postseason, hitching your wagon to Jayden Daniels as your quarterback might not be the greatest thing in the world. So outside of Daniels, are we looking at Robinson? I know Eckler. I think they opened up his window.
Window's open. Yep.
Yeah. So you got Eckler there. You have Zach Ertz. You obviously have Terry McLaurin too. Olamide Zaccheaus. I can't believe we're bringing him up, but the targets that he's getting, I think we sort of have to. Outside of Jayden Daniels, Bob, what's the commander that you like best?
I want to say, like, if I miss out on all the tight ends or I'm not taking chances, Ertz is the de facto wide receiver too, or has been until Zaccheaus stepped up the last couple of weeks. So maybe I'm riding that a little too hard, although it hasn't necessarily kept Ertz from getting the job done. Might be Ertz. I don't like every time I feel like I'm trusting Brian Robinson Jr., he says, no, don't do that, sir. Don't trust me. So I'm probably dialed out. I do love McLaurin. I mean, like, I was surprised last week that AJ Terrell, held him the way he did. That's probably Terrell's best game that I've seen this year. And Zaccheaus stepped up. So I think there's some concerns there. Maybe the safe play. And I loved, the Daniels I love him. I loved him in the draft at the price he was going at. Quarterback 11. It was still a little early. I think we were going 7th round last year, 8th round. By the time we got to the season, but the whole Rich Rebar Economico thing, 864 rushing yards this year. That tells the story, and that's made the difference. But if it was probably if I was like playing it really safe and I'm looking for higher end receiving assets, I'm probably going for Zach Ertz.
Yeah, and it makes sense, especially in tight end premium formats. You could do a lot worse than that. That if it is Rams and Commanders in the first round, that is going to be a fun one to watch for sure. The last thing I'll bring up here, just briefly touch on the Packers. I know we talked a lot about the receivers here. Bob, if you are playing in the playoff challenge where you have to pick one Packer and start them all the way through, you can have up to 4 flexes. I guess Watson is the ceiling guy and Jacobs is the guy that maybe is the best floor. How would you handle the Packers?
I would play a lot of Jacobs. Right. I just can't imagine like the word trustworthy and Packers receivers are not adjacent for me.
No, they're not.
It's just proven not to work out well. So I'm going to probably avoid that and just stick with Jacobs because they do. There will be portions of games where I'm like, man, are they going to give him the ball again? So I'll take that and hope for the continued return and hopefully have some higher end plays at wide receiver that are more consistently exciting for me.
That is your quick and dirty look at the FFPC World Famous Playoff Challenge. We'll have more on that next week, and I'll tell you who's going to be joining me next week on the show at the end of the show. If you want to get in right now, please do so at myffpc.com for the World Famous Playoff Challenge. Special reminder, the NFL is starting their playoffs on Wildcard Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern as opposed to 4:30 Eastern. So all of you who like to wait until the last few hours to get in, you won't be able to wait this year. You got to get them in on Saturday morning. Scan the QR code that our producer Matt Deutsch has put up on the screen right now. That'll take you right there, and you can register. Little as $35, went up to $500,000 in the world famous FFPC playoff challenges this year. Before we get to the playoff challenge, we have one more weekly challenge we need to get to, and it's maybe the most fun and maddening one of the season. It's week 18, and who better to put a lineup together with me than Bob Harris, who is actually trying to do this in real life, giving you the best week 18 fantasy advice out there from Footballguys and SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio. We're going to take a quick break, catch our breath. When we come back, we'll put together that lineup and wrap things up here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.
They're making an FFPC lineup. So if you guys aren't set up with FFPC, use promo code COOP at myffpc.com. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more, and you can play with us over there. I like doing the FFPC Weekly Challenge. I play like all the different DFS type things. In this one, which Nate, you have not played, so here's how it goes. No salary, no draft. You can start anyone you want. The only rule is you cannot start 2 players from the same team. So it makes for a lot of very difficult decisions because there's a lot of chalk. You got to separate the good chalk from the bad chalk, and there's no stacking. So on one hand, you don't have to worry about playing against somebody that starts like Burrow and Chase, and Burrow throws 5 touchdowns to Chase. Like, that can't happen here, but we also can't use that for leverage. We gotta kind of navigate around it. We finished in the money with Dave Kluge. We finished in the money with Bob Harris. We come very close with some other lineups. And here's what we do with that, Nate. If you come in third or fourth in these contests, so we're in a 30-person contest. If you come in third or fourth, they either give you $100 or they give you an entry into a $125 buy-in best ball for next year. So if like with Bob Harris, we won that, and he's like, no, don't take the money. We're going to run that again and do a show in the offseason. If you come in second, you get the same thing. You can take $300 or $350 Fantasy Pros main event, which we'd probably do that. And then as we worked out the deal last week with Linda and Wyatt, if we win the $600, we just take that and we spend it on drinks at a big party at the Expo.
All right, I'm game for that. So if we win the 2 low, let's push it on. If we take the 600, it's drinks at the Expo. I love that.
25 minutes left in the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network for January 2nd, 2025. Happy New Year, everybody, in case I didn't wish you that before. We are joined tonight by Bob Harris from Footballguys and SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio. Follow him on the X at Football Diehard. In fact, he's going to be going on. I feel like I should be talking more this last segment, Bob, so you can save on your voice because you're going live on the air now.
All good, man. All good.
Okay, good. Mike Dempsey and him will be joined by Footballguys' own Dave Kluge. That is coming up, SiriusXM Fantasy Sports at 10 o'clock tonight Eastern Time. The FFPC Weekly Challenge is something we have done the last few years, and obviously every single week during the season outside of week 1. It's kind of fun. There's no draft. There's no salary cap. You choose 10 or 12 players, watch them ride through the weekend's games. Only 1 player per team. This is the exact same format as the world famous FFPC Playoff Challenge. Enter for as little as $35, win up to $2,500. Scan the QR code on the screen or just go to myffpc.com right now. Play in 10, 30, or 100 team contests. We are going to put together a lineup tonight, Bob, that will feature some interesting names, or maybe not so much, so many interesting names tonight, as we look at who we need to build this team with. A quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, a tight end, 4 flexes. I am here to help. I am here to offer my input, but I'm going to let you tell us where you want to start as far as positions go this week. Full PPR with tight end premium scoring, sir.
So this might be a little off the charts here. I'm going to go Bo Nix at quarterback.
Now, why do you I don't think that's that weird of a pick as you think it is.
I don't think it is. I think a lot of people would be looking at like Joe Burrow, but I think I'm looking at other Bengals, and we can only have 1 per team. Also, Kansas City Chiefs, I don't think we're going to see Chris Jones or many of the key defenders that I'm interested in. Denver, obviously motivated, needs to win at the very least. So I think Nix is the guy that I want to lean into on this one.
The Broncos are 10.5-point favorites at home against Kansas City with a total of 40. I can't imagine the Carson Wentz-led Chiefs are going to be piling on the points. This could be a big Knicks game. And the great thing about Knicks is, and I guess I didn't realize this, or I didn't think about it during draft season, Bob. Boy, does that guy have a set of legs on him, and he can really churn up the yardage rushing too.
It's been the difference. It's been a huge difference maker, but also very good at the passing. And he's and I do like his receiving assets. And one of the reasons that instead of I don't like the backfield so much, and the receivers, it's starting. Like a month ago, maybe it would have just been Cortland Sutton would have been the easy call there. Mm-hmm. It's no longer the easy call.
Bob, do you play Dynasty Fantasy Football or no?
I do.
Okay, perfect. How would you rank the 5 rookie quarterbacks from this season going forward in Dynasty between Caleb Williams, Jayden Daniels, Drake May, Michael Penix, and Bo Nix? Because we've got basically a season outside of Michael Penix. We've got a season of experience, a season of information right now of these guys.
Daniels, Nix, May. I'll go Williams, Penix.
Wow. So Williams is 4 on that. And by the way,
I like Williams too, by the way, but I like those. I like Drake May. Seems to be a guy who, if they put some pieces around him, and I wonder if we aren't going to see some attrition pieces, and maybe I'll think differently if Ben Johnson shows up there as coach, or maybe not. I think that's the where I got a little dicey there.
Okay. And I say wow because I don't necessarily disagree with you, but it is weird to hear it out loud.
It is.
But a Caleb Williams 4.
Part of it is the stability of the organization around him. I think the Commanders with this new regime in there, and we'll see if Cliff Kingsbury sticks around. I don't think he's like the difference maker. I think Jayden Daniels to me is the quarterback of this draft. And the only concerns for me were highlighted against Atlanta when he took that big hit right at the goal line. Mm-hmm. He does not shy away from contact as much as I would like him to. I think he'll learn that over time. This is not LSU. You can't lean into that contact and get away with it when you're 210 pounds. But after that, I think I wanted to be a little aggressive on May. And look, they have a lot of work to do in New England. They have a lot of work to do in Chicago too, though. I don't know, just organizationally, and we'll see. Maybe Penix should be the guy, but I think the top two for me, Nix has Sean Payton's trust, right? And I've seen this movie before. I've seen quarterbacks who have Sean Payton's trust go on to do great things, and it seems like he's planted his flag, and I think that's worth me planting a flag on. And we'll see what happens with Caleb Williams. And maybe he ends up proving me wrong. He has all the talent, right? He makes all the throws. But part of it is because he has to make all the throws. Right now, like the offensive line. So we'll have some attrition at wide receiver. I'm guessing Keenan Allen will be gone. I don't know that that's a disqualifying factor, but it changes the dynamic a little bit. And Roma Dunze's there, and he'll rise up, and a new coach will come in and do things. But I like some of the young receiving talent around Bo Nix. I like the coach, and I like the fact that he's going to be locked in for many years with that coach.
Yeah, and Denver's winning games right away too, which is always a feather in the cap of that quarterback, which is Bo Nix, the player we're going with here as our quarterback tonight in the weekly challenge Week 18 lineup. Would you like to stay in the backfield and tackle some running backs here, Bob?
Yeah, let's do that. I think I'm going to go ahead, and one of them has to be Jahmyr Gibbs.
No David Montgomery in a must-win, not a must-win game, but for the number one seed, essentially. Yeah,
they're playing for something.
And it's Dan Campbell too, which that guy is. I know Robert Saleh has the whole all gas no brakes. Dan Campbell really, literally is all gas no brakes. And that Gibbs, while he didn't, it took him a while on Monday Night Football against San Francisco. He still ended up having a really good night. Gets in the end zone late, obviously. And when you take away the thunder from Thunder and Lightning, in order for that storm to still be raining on everybody, you need more lightning, and you're getting more lightning with Jahmyr Gibbs. So I'm with you. I mean, there's a couple of musts I could see this week at running back, but he's definitely one of them.
For sure. And can we just go ahead and throw Bijan in with him?
That was the other one I was going to say is a must. Atlanta, here's the thing. They probably are not getting into the playoffs, but they still have a chance.
They need to play like it.
Yeah, they need to play like it. And they get Carolina, who just was awful last week. So certainly Bijan Robinson, a guy that he got 2 touchdowns last week, didn't he, Bob? Got in the end zone twice. Yeah. So, and this is with Penix. I think that you can't do any better at running back if you're going to pick 2 than Gibbs and Robinson this week. They both have extraordinarily high floors and high ceilings as well. So I love those 2 picks here to kick things off. Nix, Gibbs, and Robinson are backfield. We still have 4 flexes left, 2 receivers and a tight end. Where are we going to next, my friend?
I should probably look at tight end before I run out of teams, right?
It's a lot of the familiar faces, right? You have Brock Bowers, who they have nothing to play for against the Chargers,
but he has records. He can hit the all time. What record is he chasing this week?
Well, he broke
most catches by Raiders receiver total.
Oh, in any season.
I think that might be true.
Okay. Yeah, it would make sense. I mean, I don't know who else would be up there. And I know that he broke the record for most receptions by any rookie in any season last week, and then most yardage by any tight end in a season last week. But certainly, yes, there are more records that he can set, and quite frankly, maybe extend the records he already has too.
So let's say I'm not playing any other Raider or any other Cardinal. So this is between Bowers and McBride, and I think maybe the matchup leans a little bit in the favor of Bowers as well.
Okay, now that's true, and I would agree with you. But bear in mind, we could still flex out Trey McBride if we wanted to.
Oh, that's true.
It's not like it's an either or. So I'll
Let's
put
do
Bowers.
that.
You want to put Trey McBride as one of the flexes?
Yes.
Okay. I love this. I absolutely love it. So we're going to put Brock Bowers in at tight end at home against the Chargers this week. And then we're going to put Trey McBride, who caught his first touchdown of the season this past week. He had a rushing touchdown earlier this year, but he catches his first touchdown this past week. They get the 49ers at home in the Pride Bowl, I guess, as it would be in the NFC West right now, with Arizona and San Francisco playing for nothing. Those guys are both target monsters in their offenses. They have been all season. I don't think week 18 is going to be any different. So we get Bowers and McBride in as one of our flexes. Here we go. Okay, so 2 receivers, 3 flex spots left, Bob.
So Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be in my lineup against the Colts.
Let me ask you this before we go forward. 2025 draft, first round pick for Brian Thomas?
Damn near. We were talking about this yesterday. Like between him and Neighbors, I mean, that's going to be a conversation if they make it into the first round.
Yeah, and I think what's been great about Thomas is he's doing it with he kind of did it with Lawrence. He's definitely doing it with Mac Jones, who has not ever been fantasy relevant, and yet Brian Thomas has been fantasy dominant with Jones throwing him the rock. Now, Engram has been, I get that. Christian Kirk has been out, but we have seen a guy ascend that will, if Jacksonville hires a new head coach, one of the questions in the interview will be, maybe the first question is, how do we get more Brian Thomas involved, or more Brian Thomas touches in this offense? Because that offense could go with him over ETN, over Lawrence, over anybody else. I love Brian Thomas next year, and I think too, it's one of those players, Bob. You don't want to buy into the hype, but I think that you can, to the point of a second round pick, maybe a first round pick. I
agree with that. Eight games, he's had at least 60 yards and a touchdown. Who is that tied for a rookie record? That would be Randy Moss. When you're tying Randy Moss type numbers, I'm in on that. I'm going to be probably I'm going to be buying the cheaper one, whoever it is of the Neighbors Thomas kind of run, but I like him. I like him an awful lot. And I'm going to throw Mike Evans in as a wide receiver too.
Yeah, he's been a beast. And Baker Mayfield's obviously looking at him all over the field, especially the end zone. Mike Evans in a game that Tampa has to win this week to fend off Atlanta. Mike Evans at home against the banged up Saints offense. Just getting back to Thomas real quick. You know, I'm not comparing him to Randy Moss. Now, no. The statistics you cited, yes, that is the comparison. However, I will bring this up. Think about the offense that Moss was in his rookie year. Think about the offense that Brian Thomas is
correct.
In. You can't help but get excited for a player like this going forward, and be very interesting to see, January, February when the drafts roll out, to see how high Thomas and Neighbors are going. So we have our 2 wide receivers here. We have 3 flex spots left. They can be running backs, they can be receivers, they can be tight ends, Bob. A lot of different ways that we can go here. No Broncos, no Lions, no Falcons, no Jaguars, no Buccaneers, no Raiders, no Cardinals. Everybody else is fair game.
So let's go ahead and use Justin Jefferson.
Okay. As our receiver from Minnesota.
It could be it could be him or Addison. I'll just play it safe here.
The Vikings, by the way, I should look this up. I meant to look this up all week, and I'm just remembering now. The total on that Vikings-Lions game is 56 and a half. Holy cow. With the Lions being a 2.5-point favorite, I would say that's a positive game script for Jefferson. That's a positive game script for everybody in that game. So, yeah, I love the idea of that's a Sunday night game. That's going to be fantastic. So I love the idea of getting a Vikings receiver. It pairs kind of nicely with the Lions win. If Gibbs does end, I guess anything pairs nicely in that game, but having the running back from the Lions as well as the number 1 receiver for the Vikings, that could bode well for us in putting up a big number here. So Justin Jefferson is our second flex. We have 2 flexes left.
Do I have the intestinal fortitude to take Mark Andrews over Derrick Henry? Yes, I do, in a tight end premium.
Okay, tight end premium.
Cleveland.
We're going, yeah,
against Cleveland.
Now Baltimore, are they locked into the 3 seed?
I think they've got some motivation to play. Let me double check my numbers here.
Okay, you check that, but I'll bring this up right now. Regardless of if they're locked in, it sounds like the Ravens are playing all their starters. Cleveland is rolling out Dorian. I believe Dorian. No, they're not.
No, they're starting Zappy this week.
Yeah, Bailey Zappi will be the starting quarterback for the Browns this week. And I'm looking at it right now. Obviously, this depends upon where you shop. I can't remember the last time I've seen this in a professional game. The Ravens are 20-point favorites. 20-point favorites in a game that has a total of 41 points. Mark Andrews is a guy that, like you said, he's been touchdown dependent, but he's been getting a lot of touchdowns.
So this is a must win for them. They need to win this one.
Okay.
So I almost feel like I being too cute by half going with the tight end instead of the running back in this one against the Cleveland defense with that kind of being that big of favorites. But they got to get up if they're going to get the points. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna go Andrews and see how ugly it feels after the fact.
This is an interesting. I just realizing this now. It's an all AFC North Saturday. Right. Where you have the Browns and Ravens at 4:30, and if the Ravens win, they get the 3 spot. And then the Steelers, I believe, are they locked into 5? I could be wrong on that. But the Bengals have to win, and it's the Bengals and Steelers in the nightcap Saturday night, and the Bengals are actually 2-point favorites in that game. So that's very interesting as well. So we're rolling with Mark Andrews as a second tight end. Bob, congratulations. We've been doing this all season. Nobody has had 3 tight ends in their lineup. You are the first, which is great for week 18. I love it. We have 1 spot left. I'll just bring
this up. We know who it is.
Okay, go ahead.
It's got to be Ja'Marr Chase.
Now, I was just going to say, we don't have any Bengals yet, and this could be a nice little bounce back game after we saw the T. Higgins coronation last week. This could be a big Ja'Marr Chase game against the Steelers. Do we know the status of Joey Porter? I think Tomlin said he's playing.
I think they expect him to, but will he be 100%? I don't know.
Yeah, my guess would be probably not. And so there you go. So that is our lineup. This is littered with talent here. Bob Harris's FFPC Weekly Challenge Week 18 lineup is as follows. Bo Nix at quarterback, Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson at running back. Wide receiver, Brian Thomas. Running backs are Jahmyr Gibbs, Brian Robinson. Wide receivers are Brian Thomas, Mike Evans, Justin Jefferson, and Ja'Marr Chase. And the tight ends are Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, and Mark Andrews. You can dupe this lineup if you want or submit your own at myffpc.com. Click on the weekly challenge link. Enter for as little as $35. Win up to $2,500 in 10, 30, or 100 team lineups in the final weekly challenge of the FFPC season. That's myffpc.com. That's where to go for that.
Eric Balkman, you said Brian Robinson. Make it Bijan. Make it Bijan.
Bijan Robinson. This is not good for next year in drafts where I want to draft Bijan and I say Brian.
Also, as I'm sitting here even pondering further, I'm realizing Justice Hill is out, and I'm still sticking with Mark Andrews. I have a lot of nerve.
Yeah, I love it. These are the types of calls that win these things. So I think it's fantastic. Speaking of the Brian Bijan Robinson thing, I had a buddy who was in his fantasy title game this past week, and he's not big into fantasy football. Like he knows a little bit about it, but he's telling me, should I play B. Robinson over these guys? And the whole time I'm thinking it's Brian Robinson for whatever reason. I didn't realize he had Bijan. And he's like, really? Brian Robinson? Yeah, play it. Or B. Robinson? I'm like, yeah. And then I'm like, oh, wait, is it Bijan or Brian? And then he told me Bijan. I'm like, yeah, this is totally different. So I totally misspoke on that. I do apologize. Okay. We have a few minutes left here, and I think this is a good, given that we have the end of the fantasy season with playoff challenges coming up, postseason tournaments and everything like that. It's a good time to catch our breath. I feel like the last month of the season, I'm always looking ahead to 2025. Let me ask you this, Bob. If you have the 101 in your first draft of 2025 in January, February, or whatever it is, let's say it's tight end premium. How much does Brock Bowers factor into that? Is it Ja'Marr Chase? Is it Saquon Barkley? Is it somebody else for you? As of right now, who would you be taking at the 101?
Like, as of right now, it's pretty tough because, could we be dealing with Ja'Marr Chase holdout into, I think that I hope the Bengals do the right thing. Like, in an ideal world, it would be Ja'Marr Chase. I know who his quarterback is. I know what the offense is. I know what the upside is. Jefferson, am I sure who the quarterback's going to be? Are they going to do something crazy? And well, I don't know how crazy it would be, but it's something that might change the dynamic there. Like Justin, and I'll say Justin Jefferson, I can go back to last year. He had that 5-game stretch at the end of the season playing with Nick Mullen and Josh Dobbs and Jaron Hall, and he was still wide receiver 3. Yeah. It would probably be, and like, you know, Bowers has to be in the conversation. There are going to be changes there. I don't know that it matters, but the coaching staff could change. I would probably say today, Justin Jefferson, just because I feel the most confident that nothing is going to go awry, right? Like, I think you could see things going wrong for Chase. You could, and that's, it's those two for me. It would be those two.
I think that the other thing to keep in mind too is I felt the reason Justin Jefferson was slipping in drafts last year is there weren't a lot of Sam Darnold believers out there.
Correct.
I was talking to I think it was Nelson Verbit from Dynasty Depot, and I was asking him about Jefferson, and he kind of interrupted me, and he's like, look, Darnold is talented enough to get the ball to Jefferson. They're going to feed him. I don't care who the quarterback is. And I'm like, you know what? I do feel fuzzy and warm now. And now I feel really cozy given what we saw with Darnold. Now, you're right. I don't know what's going to happen with the quarterback in Minnesota. I'd like to think that Sam Darnold is there next year. I don't know if they can let him get away. I think, Bob, and I said this, I can't remember, I was talking to you the other day. I said they've dumbed their way into the Packers strategy.
Right.
Where now
they need to franchise him.
Well, franchise him, and then once McCarthy's ready, and I know they're talking about, you know, there's teams that are interested in trading for him, but you have McCarthy who can easily sit now for 1 year, now 2 years, maybe 3 years, and then he comes in.
Correct.
The thing is, if I don't really see a way that Minnesota inks Darnold to like a 5 or 6 year deal. I don't think they want to be tied up with him. And Darnold, I don't see him wanting to accept a 2 or a 3 year deal. I think the franchise tag is really the only outcome there. Yeah,
I think that's probably the most likely outcome. And we'll see. Like, who was the draft analyst I just heard saying that McCarthy might be the first quarterback drafted, or not the first, but like
this year.
This year.
If he was in the draft, I saw that too. I don't know who it was. But yeah, he might have been the first quarterback off the board if he was in the 2025 draft.
Correct.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
We will. I want to get back to the Brian Thomas, Brock Bowers conversation. If you're in a tight end premium format in 2025 and you're drafting, which one of those guys do you think you would draft higher, Bowers or Thomas?
Bowers.
Without hesitation.
Without hesitation.
Okay.
I am going to be in on especially in tight end premiums where it matters and there's money on the line. I want one of those premium tight ends to deliver the premium production for sure.
Last thing I want to tackle tonight is the 49ers receivers. We are not going to have clarity on this situation before we start drafting in 2025. If you look into the Bob Harris crystal ball right now, which of those Niners receivers, Samuel, Jennings, Ayuk, and Pearsall, which of them are still on the team with San Francisco next season?
Pearsall for sure.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah,
I don't think they can get I don't think they can escape Ayuk at this point. So Ayuk for sure, and I think Jennings.
And Samuel's gone. He's moving on. They're gonna ship him out to somebody else.
If they have any sense, I mean, it's not working anymore. Whether he's not, and I know I've heard some of the local reporters suggest, or at least one suggest he's not hungry enough, or whatever it is. It's not working right now. We've seen glimpses of it the last couple of weeks where they've had to force feed him a little more, and he's delivered a little bit, but it hasn't been consistently productive. And I think for most of the season, we're looking at a couple of wide receiver 1 weeks on the entire year. So I just don't see the utility of it. From my perspective, 49ers probably see it differently, but from a fantasy angle of it, I think he's the one who should go.
And we know Kittle's going to be back. We know McCaffrey should be back. Purdy's going to be back. Could be a big bounce back season for San Francisco. And we will be here for it. Until then, as we follow that situation, we will be listening to you, Bob, everything that you're doing for Footballguys, SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio. Give us the rundown. You are switching to Saturdays and Sundays, or what did you say?
We're going from Saturdays to Sundays. This week we'll be on Saturday. I think it's from 4 to 6 Eastern time, just with the playoff games. And then the week after, we'll be switching from Saturdays to Sundays. We'll be on from, I think that's the first one is the 12th. We'll be on from 10 until noon the rest of the Sundays through January. The rest of the schedule is the same: Monday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night. Might miss a night or two depending on what's going on, but those are all going to be 10 to midnight as usual. The Daily Update podcast is done for the year, but you'll catch me this week. I have one of my last Ask Me Anything live stream on Saturday, and then we'll do some more stuff on the Audible channel throughout the course of the off season with my hot seat program, where we'll dig deep on some items, and you'll see tons of stuff. My fantasy notebook will be available totally free every week throughout the off season as well. So check that out. And if you're into super edgy, insane picks, check my in and out column out every Saturday. That'll go through the end of the postseason.
End of the postseason. Perfect. Now, as far as the daily podcast goes, is that going to come back in the preseason? Are we going to do anything like leading up to the draft at all, or don't you know?
I don't know. I don't know if it won't come back until the summer. My guess is it won't be back until the summer. That's how it worked last year. So, but stay tuned. Watch my X feed or my Blue Ski if you're so disposed. I'm there as well. So check it out. So we'll work that out. But I think when did I start last year? I started at the end of July. I started training camp.
Okay. All right. So there you go.
Yeah.
And I think the best way to keep up to date on this and any other changes at Football Diehard on X, as Bob will keep you abreast of everything there. I want to remind everybody to play the world famous FFPC Playoff Challenge. Get your lineups or get your teams squared away early. Play the FFPC Weekly Challenge. MyFFPC.com is where to go for both of those. Bob, this was an absolute pleasure. We will do this again. Have a great show tonight. And enjoy. We will enjoy listening to you, Mike Dempsey, and Dave Kluge. It's going to be a fantastic show.
Thanks, man. I love doing this. Hope to come back soon.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. For Bob Harris and Matt Deutsch, I am Eric Balkman. This has been the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Enjoy Week 18. We'll talk with you next week with Legendary Upsides, Steph Miller. Have a great weekend, everybody.